Hello everyone, and welcome to the strings coding lecture. So in this lecture we'll be learning about strings. Right now I have opened a live coding notebook, and as always there's an entire corresponding Jupyter notebook for this lecture. For a quick overview of the notebook, it goes over creating strings, printing strings, some differences in printing between Python 2 and 3, string indexing and slicing, string properties, string methods, and then some print formatting issues. So here's what the notebook looks like. You can go ahead and check it out on your own, and everything in this notebook is what we're going to be going over in this lecture. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and just jump right in and get started with some coding. Alright, so strings in Python are used to record usually text information, such as a name. And the way you can create a string is by using single quotes or double quotes in the most basic format. So I can put in a single quote here and then say hello and end it, close it off with another single quote, shift enter to run that cell, and now I have a string there. You can also do an entire phrase like a sentence, so I can say this is also a string, close it off, and you have a string that way as well. Now something important to note in Python is that what Python realizes here is that this string is a sequence, and we'll go over that further in just a little bit. But the way Python is thinking about this string, if you will, is that it's seeing every single letter here as part of a sequence, including the spaces. And when we learn about indexing and slicing strings, that will become a little more clear. Something I also want to note is we've been using single quotes, but we can also use double quotes to create a string. So here I have a double quote, and I can say this is a string, and you can see that works just as well. Now, why would you use double quotes versus single quotes? The reason for that is, let's say you have a string where you wanted to say I'm a string. Now if you notice here, I'm using a single quote in this I'm, so that's going to return an error because of an invalid syntax. So that's one of the instances where you're going to want to use double quotes if you have a single quote within your string. And now that will be fine. And you can also do the opposite. You could, let's say, this is a quote. And you can see that the double quotes are now within this string. Great. So now let's learn about printing a string. So because we're using this Jupyter Notebook setting, if we just run a cell that only has a string in it, it will automatically output the strings. But the correct way to display strings in your code, if you're using idle or another IDE that we've gone over before, is through printing a string. So we can declare a string such as hello world. And let's say we wanted to put in multiple strings. So I say hello world 1 and hello world 2. So if you notice here in this Jupyter Notebook setting, only the last string was displayed. So the correct way to output these strings is using a print statement. And the way that works in Python 2 is by writing the word print space, and then whatever string you want to print. So here again I'll do it, print space, and then the string. So now you'll notice here it's actually printing the string, and these quotes, these single quotes that we saw earlier, have gone away. And this is the main way you want to output or display strings in your code. Alright, some other things to know is that there's special backslash characters we can use in order to print certain things. And what I mean by that is, let's say I wanted to print a new line, such as a space or something. And the way you can do that is by using a \n notation. So I'll show you what that looks like in practice. So I'm going to put a string that says here is a new line, and I'm going to put that \n, and here is the second line. So if you notice, this \n is an indication to Python to not treat this as a regular n, but actually treat this as a new line symbol. And so what that does is it prints out everything until it hits that new line, and then it prints everything else afterwards. So it's able to break up your print statement into multiple lines. Another feature that uses that backslash is T, which stands for tab. So if I run this, it'll actually insert a tab, those like 5 spaces in between where that backslash T was. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, so if we hop over to the Jupyter Notebook, you'll notice there's a Python 3 alert when it comes to printing. So let's go ahead and take a better look at what that's actually talking about. So Python 3 alerts. There's something to note. If you're using Python 3 versus Python 2, print is a function, not a statement anymore. So if you noticed earlier, we've been printing things with print, space, and then that string. So in Python 2, your print statements are actually going to be print functions, and they're going to look like this. They're going to say print parentheses whatever string you want to print, and then close parentheses. That happens to be a point of confusion because a lot of times you start tutorials that are either in Python 3 or Python 2, and one of the very first assignments you have to do is print hello world, and people get confused based on what version they're using. So you can go ahead and fix this. If you're using Python 2 but want to use the print function, just as before, you can import from the future module. And we'll go over modules later on in the course. But if you want to be printing using Python 3 functions instead of Python 2, you can put this line in your code from __ future _ space import space print _ function, and that will import this functionality into your Python 2. So up next, we're going to be learning about string basics such as length and string indexing. So I won't go ahead and import this. I'll keep using the Python 2 notation, but if you're using Python 3, just keep in mind this is what your print functions are going to look like. And if you're using Python 2, you can import that functionality with that statement. All right, so let's go ahead and move along to some string basics. So we can use a function called len to check the length of a string. So I can say hello world, close it off with single quotes, and then I can put that inside a length function, len. And the way that's going to look is len open parentheses, whatever that string is, close parentheses. And if I run that, it counts the length of the string. So keep in mind, as I said before, the strings are a sequence. So that means that Python can use indexes to call parts of that sequence. And that also means that Python is taking into account that middle space as part of its count. So if you count this here, there's 10 letters, but that space counts as another part of that sequence. So the total count of that length of that string is 11. All right, so let's go ahead and assign a label and create a variable here. So I'm going to say s is equal to hello world. And so now if I call that s either by printing it or just calling s there, s is been assigned hello world. Great. So let's go ahead and start indexing. So indexing uses brackets in Python. So the way this is going to work is I can say s open bracket, the index number, close brackets, and that will return the first element. So something to note in Python is that indexing starts at 0. So like I said before, each of these letters and spaces in this string is part of a sequence. So Python is thinking of this capital H as being in the 0 part of the sequence, E as being in the 1 part of the sequence, 2, 3, 4, so on and so on. So let's say I wanted to get that second letter, which if we're counting from index 0, that's going to be bracket 1, then that can be E there. Great. So we can also perform slicing, and slicing grabs everything up to a designated point. And the syntax for that is using a colon. So I'll show you a quick example. So let's go ahead and grab that S, colon, or whoops, sorry, open bracket, 1, colon, close bracket. So before we actually run this, let's break down what Python's going to say. It's going to say, for this S object, which is hello world, grab everything from that one index, and this colon means onwards. So this will grab everything from 1 all the way to the end. And since indexing starts at 0, that's going to be ELLO space world. And if you notice, something to keep in mind is right now there's no change to that original string. We're just grabbing part of it with this notation. Okay, so you can also say grab everything up to something. So let's say I wanted to grab everything up to the 3rd index. Well, that will give you HEL. So to keep in mind, it's everything up to the 3rd index. So if I look at hello world again, let's just go ahead and show S. That's 0, 1, 2. So if I say colon to 3, that says grab everything, that's what the colon stands for, up to that 3rd index. Remember, it's up to, it doesn't actually include it, which is why we only get 3 letters back. The 0, the 1, and the 2 index. So just to reiterate, here we're telling Python to grab everything from 0 up to 3, not including the 3rd index. So you'll notice this a lot in Python. A lot of the statements and usually a lot of the indexing statements are in the context of up to but not including. Okay, so hopping back to that colon notation, if I wanted to grab everything, then I can just say a colon, and that says grab everything. So something that's really nice about indexing is that we can also go backwards. So if you imagine that this string is almost like a loop, if h is 0, then -1 or 1 backwards would be the last letter or element in that string. So I can say S bracket -1, and that will return D. So that's the last letter. So 1 index behind 0, it loops back around and grabs that D. I can also use that same notation to, let's say, grab everything but the last letter. So I can say grab everything but that last letter there, so that will be hello world without that D at the end. Another thing we can use indexing and slice notation is to grab elements of a sequence by a specified step size. So if you notice right now, the default is 1. But we can use 2 colons in a row and then a number to specify a frequency to grab elements. So what I mean by that is a quick example. I could say, whoops, square brackets, colon, colon. So that means grab everything up to everything. And that 3rd number is going to specify the frequency, so in step size. So right now, this will be everything. So grab everything, that colon, colon, in step sizes of 1. But I could also say go in steps of 2. So I could say colon, colon, step size 2. And now that's pretty much going to grab every other element or letter in that string. And something you can also do is use that same notation to print that string backwards. So I can say grab from the beginning of everything to the end of everything, but your step size is going to be -1. So that's actually telling Python to traverse the string backwards. And it's actually gone and printed out that string in reverse. So this is just a simple notation for reversing a string. These double colon notation methods are not super common, but this reversing of a string is a pretty quick and common way. At least this particular line is pretty common. But these other ones are not super common, but it's important to know them in case you ever find yourself needing them in your code. All right, so let's go ahead and learn about some string properties. Something that's important to note is that strings have a property known as immutability. And the way you spell that is immutability. Immutability. So what this means is that once that string is created, the elements within it can't be changed or replaced. So for example, remember S currently stands for hello world. And let's say you wanted to try to change the first letter to X instead of H. You might think you'd be able to say, hey, that 01, set it equal to X. But if you notice, we get an error. And the type error is string object does not support item assignment. So as you go along in learning Python, these errors are going to be super helpful to find out what you're doing wrong in your code. So something that's always important to remember for strings is that they're immutable. Once it's created, you can't go around changing the particular elements in the sequence. What you can do, though, is concatenate strings together, so you can add on to them. You can't just change what's already there, though. So what I mean by concatenating is, let's say you have S, you can use the plus symbol to concatenate strings together. So I can say S plus, and then let's go ahead and make another string. So I can say concatenate me, which is basically just saying to stick it onto it. And here I have hello world space concatenate me. So while I can't change particular elements in that string, I can add on to it. So that is allowed. And I can also reassign S completely. Just as we saw earlier in some previous lectures, I could say S equals S plus concatenate me. And now if I run that and I check what S is, now S is equal to hello world space concatenate me. Great. Some other arithmetic symbols you can use for strings is the multiplication symbol. So for instance, if I say letter is equal to the string just Z, and then if you notice I call letter as that variable and I get Z, then if I say letter times 10, Python's going to print that letter 10 more times, or 10 times the original amount, whatever it happens to be. So then if I say, let's say letter equals ZZ, print out that letter check, and now I print it 10, so now it's double as many times. Okay, and now we're going to wrap up our method with a quick introduction to built-in strings. Built-in string methods. So objects in Python, they usually have built-in methods, and these methods are basically just functions inside the objects, and we'll go into all that in much more depth later on, but they basically allow us to perform actions or commands on the objects itself. So let's go ahead and create or reassign S again, just to say hello. And here I have S equal to hello. And the syntax for methods on objects is going to be whatever that object label name is, in our case S, dot, and then you call the method on it. So one of the most simple methods for strings is to uppercase a string. And that method is known as upper. Close parentheses there. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, okay, take my string S, that period or decimal point is an indicator that I want to call a method on that object, and then the method I'm using is upper. And I'm going to say close parentheses because I'm not going to add what are called arguments into that method. And so what that does is it basically uppercases that entire string. So the reason we're using Jupyter notebooks, and that's super awesome, is you'll see if I click tab right after that decimal or a period, I get a list of all the different methods I can use on my strings. So if you want, you can go ahead and check out the advanced string lectures, and we'll go over and break down a lot of these different methods that are super useful for strings. Okay, so a couple more methods I want to show you is lower, and I can close parentheses there, and that will lower that string again. So you'll notice here that capital H is now lowercase h. Another thing is I can split a string. So I can say s dot the split method, close parentheses, and if you notice here, nothing happened. It's returning a list, which we'll learn about in a little bit. But I can say split by a particular element, so I can say split by e, and now you'll notice it's returned a list of that string, but it's split it where that e occurred. So I have h as an element and now LLO as another element in that list. And we'll be going over lists in just a second. Great. So that's about it as far as strings in general. We'll be working with them a ton in Python. So go ahead and review the Jupyter Notebook that goes along with this lecture. Make sure you understand everything. And we'll be recovering and re-going over strings as we move along in the course. Great. And like I said earlier, if you want to learn more about some of these methods, go ahead and check out the Advanced Strings lecture. Okay, thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture.